David Cameron has given the strongest hint yet that he's determined for the UK to intervene in Syria. Speaking in the House of Commons, he said Britain would have to use hard military force in Syria to defeat ISIL and secure peace, and added that aid spending, the protection of refugees, couldn't solve the crisis alone. Well, the PM's suggestion comes days after he admitted to Parliament that British nationals with ISIS had been targeted and killed by an RAF drone. Many believe the revelation was a way of perhaps testing the waters as he prepares to ask the Commons to vote again for military intervention. But the situation now is even more complex than it was. Jeremy Bowen is in Syria and he sent us his thoughts from there.
The war in Syria is into its 5th year. It's been going on for almost the same length of time as the Second World War. Around 200,000 people are dead. Of Syria's pre-war population, around half have lost their homes, and of those, 4 million are refugees outside the country, 8 million are refugees inside the country. In other words, displaced people. Many of those are effectively destitute, relying on various kinds of handouts. The aid operation here is now very badly funded. A senior official here said to me that to feed people, they're trying to raise enough money, which is the equivalent, to feed people for a month. They're trying to raise the equivalent in value of 3 Big Macs. That is $12.50 US. They're not succeeding in doing that. That is the challenge that the aid people have, and they say that if countries fully funded the operation here, then things would get easier and there wouldn't be so many refugees. Now, the thing though which drives people out more than anything is the war. That is the overarching reality. People leave their homes because they're scared. They're scared they might die. They're scared that their children won't have any kind of a future. The war is going on fiercely. No side has the military capacity to score a knockout blow on all the other factions put together. There are wars within wars, wars alongside wars, and of course what is making it very complicated is the fact that other outside powers are increasingly involved. The refugee flows will continue as long as the war continues. People will continue to die in great numbers as long as the war continues. Lives here will be ruined, people will be maimed, educations will be cut short until the war ends. That's the key thing. If you want to make life better for the Syrians, find a way to end the war.
Jeremy Bowen in Syria for us. Well, this morning came news of increased Russian military support in Syria for Bashar al-Assad. Here, David Cameron would need to work out how much support the Conservatives would have from within the party and from a Labour Party that may soon have at its helm a staunch anti-war leader. Allegra Stratton has been crunching the numbers to see if Labour MPs will be able to take David Cameron over any line.
12 years ago, people like this and their allies in Parliament led opposition to the Iraq War. Now, through their new hope, Jeremy Corbyn, they could be about to lead Her Majesty's opposition.
Thank you to every single person.
Today's government wants to come back to Parliament to get support to strike Syria. What does one ally of Jeremy Corbyn's think his response will be if he becomes leader?
I think it'll be against bombing. I think Jeremy will want to try and get peace talks going with the Russians, with the Iranians, even the Arab states, because, you know, they're sitting back, you know, it's their land. They've got this on their doorstep.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to move...
Back in the summer of 2013, Ed Miliband led the Labour Party in defeating the Conservatives in their bid to extend airstrikes to Syria. Then 31 Tory MPs joined with Labour. One of those rebels thinks the mood in the party hasn't changed.
The parliamentary arithmetic was not dictated last time they lost by an anathema to Syria or by the fact that the Tories who rebelled were pacifists. It was because they all thought there was no plan. A lot of them were ex-soldiers, ex-regular or reservist soldiers. They all know there's a big price to war, innocent people die and so on. So they want to see a real prize, a real outcome at the end of it, and a plausible way, a reasonable way of achieving that. None of that was there last time. And to date, we haven't seen it this time either.
I understand the Tory whips think they can limit the rebellion to under 20 Conservative MPs. They will also face opposition from the Liberal Democrats and the Democratic Ulster Unionist Party, which means they have to persuade some 13 Labour MPs to join with them to get action in Syria through Parliament. Today, Newsnight has spoken to 13 Labour MPs who are willing to consider action in Syria. The parliamentary arithmetic will be extremely finely balanced. The Conservatives will not be minded to bring any proposal to the House unless they're certain they're going to win. But Newsnight's research today suggests they have a chance.
In truth, I do regret casting that vote at that time. I've never broken the party whip in 10 years, and if you were to ask me which of all those votes in 10 years as an MP is the one that's troubled you most, it would be that one. Is it really morally right to say that we will come to the aid of the victims of ISIS in Iraq, but not in Syria?
And if Jeremy Corbyn becomes leader?
If our response to questions like this was never to authorise military intervention because of what had happened in the past, I think that would be a counsel of despair to victims of oppression around the world. I wouldn't like Britain to take that stance, and I wouldn't like the Labour Party to take that stance either.
It isn't just old hands, but new Labour MPs too.
If the Prime Minister can convince me that he has a comprehensive strategy on Syria with a humanitarian, political and military component, I would contemplate two things on Syria. The first would be support for extending airstrikes over Syrian airspace to target ISIS, and the second would be UK support for a no-fly zone over Syria.
Jeremy Corbyn's ally suspects enough Labour MPs will support the Tories and strikes on Syria go ahead.
I think they will get enough to bomb.
And what do you guys do about it?
Well, nothing. If they're going to join with the Tories to bomb, there's nothing you can do. What can you do?
But in what sense is Jeremy Corbyn then leading the Labour Party?
Well, what sense was the other one leading the Labour Party when we defied the whip to vote the other way against bombing? What did they do with us? Nothing.
It's images like these from today that have changed the situation for MPs. The question is just how much. 2 years ago, the Labour Party was united against action in Syria, the Tories divided. This time round, it looks like divisions within the Labour Party may give the Prime Minister his opening.
Well, that was Allegra Stratton, and joining me now are two Labour MPs, John Woodcock and Rachael Maskell. Thanks very much for coming in. We'll talk about the implications for the Labour Party in a second, but essentially, John Woodcock, setting out your stall, do you think there's cause to intervene?
Well, clearly there is, and we need to wait and see what the government is actually talking about, because David Cameron has really hardened the rhetoric against Al-Assad, the Al-Assad regime, which is a new departure. But as I understood it, what they were preparing for was actually an extension of airstrikes which were already happening across the Iraq border, extending them through what is at the moment a theoretical border between Iraq and Syria, because it's all territory which is controlled by Daesh extremists, and so being able to take direct RAF intervention in a way which is already happening from the States, and we are already saying that's legal, and we're already giving logistical support to those operations, and it would extend RAF direct participation over the border. So that for me makes sense, but it is in of itself completely insufficient to actually really change the situation on the ground. Right.
I mean, you voted against airstrikes in Syria last time round. You think this is a very different place or cause?
No, I was one of the few Labour MPs who wouldn't follow Ed Miliband into effectively ruling out action, which was at that time we were being asked to take action against Al-Assad after his chemical strike. Now, it is my clear view that the UK and the US's failure to do that actually not only emboldened Al-Assad, but it emboldened the ISIL, the Daesh extremists, to be able to roll into Iraq, thinking that they would be able to do so without a decisive military intervention to support the Iraqi people. And so far they've been proved right. And it is so important, if we are going to change this, to be able to show that we can actually be firmer on this subject.
Rachael Maskell, would you agree that the ground we are in at the moment isn't working, however you look at it?
incredible challenging times at the moment. I don't think anyone will dispute that, but I believe there is still scope to try and extend those diplomatic efforts, and I think that has really got to be our focus at this time.
Wait, why? I mean, what has worked diplomatically?
Well, the reality is when we start invading, when we start bringing more airstrikes, we are pushing the situation, the leaders into a corner further, bringing out further retaliation, and I don't think we want to see an escalation of the situation in Syria at this time.
So when you hear somebody like Pat McFadden, sorry to interrupt, but talking about a council of despair, that he doesn't want to see his Labour Party acting like that.
Well, we have got to continue to pursue the dialogue and dialogue with the countries which are able to engage. So with Russia and Germany taking those steps, which it has very recently done, talking about the role that Saudi Arabia and some of those states in the Middle East have got to play, like Iran, in trying to bring some pressure on the situation. That's really important before we start talking about furthering airstrikes and furthering more despair in the situation, which is already in complete chaos out there.
Well, look, I mean, there are millions and millions of people who have been displaced, who have fled the situation. The situation for Syrian civilians is utterly desperate, and they are being oppressed on two fronts, many of them. You have an al-Assad brutal regime, which is dropping barrel bombs on its own people, and you have ISIL extremism, for which there is no scope. I mean, I'm sure we will agree on this. There is no scope for negotiation.
Let me just talk a little bit internally, and of course we're ahead of any potential vote at the moment, but Allegra's maths suggested that there need to be another 12 of you, if you like, to support the Tories if they want to get this over the line. Do you think there are 12?
Well, my guess would be yes, but this all depends on what the proposal is that the government brings forward. And it may be hearing David Cameron, who, I mean, has actually really shown an abdication of leadership over recent years, that they don't know at the moment what they are going to be bringing to Parliament, because it is a very different prospect to say we are going to try to launch a military intervention or corral support for one which could take out al-Assad, compared to...
The crux of the issue, that this is so complicated at the moment that people don't know which way to turn, because the reality is there is conflict on both sides, and therefore we can make the situation far worse for people within
Jeremy
Syria.
Corbyn, and of course we don't know what's going to happen on Saturday, but he's made clear that there is almost no situation he can foresee in which he would recommend intervention. Are you in the same camp? Is there no circumstance that would change your mind?
At this stage, I really do believe that we need to create those platforms where we can have dialogue and then to work through the countries that can. So I don't believe there is a case to be made.
So you lot would be the rebels. I mean, this is a sort of curious turnaround, right? If you had a brand new leader and there's a group of people who want to back the Tories.
I think on an issue as fundamentally important as sending military forces in to intervene in the country, putting them in harm's way and potential for conflict, you have to follow what you believe individually as an MP is right. That's what I did on Syria, but one
thing I think we have to do is really look at the evidence base to ensure that we build out based not just on opinion but on evidence, and I think that's where all sides of the party need to focus.
Well, and thank you both very much indeed.